probably a few minutes over starting, but that should be no problem. Hopefully at this point everyone has pulled up and ready to go. Your presentation slide deck, as you've started it already, when we do the breakout section at the end, we'll be using that. So if you have that up and ready to go, that will save us some time, and we can work with it then. You should also have a copy of the Harrington article, which was sent to you by Benny this afternoon, I believe, around noonish. We're going to just be using part of that when we talk about audience adaptation. And then, of course, we have to think about the audience that we're adapting to, which is the judges. So I hope that you have the bios from the judges, and we'll do a little exercise trying to figure out how we can best adapt to that audience. Now, most of you, all but one of you, I think, are from the Ross School. How many of you have had communications classes already? I know Xian does because she's in my class. She's a star student, very wonderful. And you have also?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to I was basing this kind of on the fact that a lot of you had this experience already. So since it's a small group, please shoot your hand up if something seems like it doesn't make sense. I've kind of condensed a lot of different components together for the presentation.
Sorry, how to put our questions so we are not lost?
Okay. I'm pretty good normally at looking out and seeing if people are tracking with me or not, but because it's a small group, shoot your hand up if something sounds confusing. I've tried to condense down for the time, respecting that it's a Friday night, and respecting that I also wanted to have time to give one-on-one feedback to all of you. But if something is kind of confusing, please shoot up your hand. It's no problem. Because if you have those questions, probably someone else does too. Okay, so my name is Sarah Zimmerman. I'm a lecturer here at the Ross School. I have about 10 years in education, teaching at different universities. My last job allowed me to do economic development. I was VP for a company that brought a lot of money in from China to the US. So I have a distinct advantage in doing something like this for a group with you guys because I have a good understanding of what US companies and US consumers and US venture capitalists, angel investors want. And I also have kind of a pretty good understanding from practical experience about the Chinese mindset and the Chinese business mindset. I've taught sales courses, I've taught marketing courses, and here I'm teaching communications classes. What I've done for this presentation is mostly use a lot of communication principles and trying to compile something that I thought would be very helpful for a wide variety of different backgrounds in giving pitches before. How many of you, with a show of hands, have given a pitch before? One. Okay, excellent. So I might modify a little bit as we go. And again, if there's any questions, raise your hand.
My question is very like, you define a pitch is something like a communication and sales. Like, what is a pitch? Because the presentation is like a sort of like just trying to convince people.
If you have ever tried to, and this is a good question, how many of you have ever tried to get funding or money for a project? Okay. How many of you who didn't raise your hand have ever tried to get funding or money from your parents? Okay. So probably everyone has done a pitch of some kind, and we'll find some very similar characteristics between all these different kinds. The slide deck will be a lot more impressive with the investors than with your parents. We're going to this is the agenda for our meeting. This is the first thing that I want you to kind of consider as you go through and think about setting up your slide deck. It is good to have an agenda. Why? It kind of organizes everything for your audience, right? A big part, and what we're going to start off with is audience adaptation, shifting your mindset. But one of the biggest things that we have to think about is if we're concerned about being effective with our audience, we have to do everything in our power to make it easy for them to follow us, right? Setting an agenda is the first thing that we can do because at every different step along the presentation process, the audience can tell exactly where we are, how far we have to go, and setting something like this, as you'll see in my deck today for you, really allows them to follow with you better, and that allows you to be more effective. So the very first thing, practically, that I want you to do is build an agenda into your slide deck for your pitches. We'll be going through first. You'll see this agenda show up between each of the different sections that we'll talk about, and the first one is shifting our mindset. Okay, so shifting our mindset. Look at, no, Xian cannot answer, but everyone but her can answer. Look at this slide. Marketing, sales, fundraising, product service design, communications, persuasion, arguments, maybe with friends. Could you shift up a little bit? Looks like you are having difficulty seeing it. Some of my font is a little bit smaller. That's another thing we're talking about. So maybe right here. Relationships, maybe just like right here maybe? It's okay?
It's okay.
It's okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
She won't bite.
She seems very nice. Relationships with friends, with romantic partners. What do all of these things have in mind? How can these all become more effective? How many of you are studying marketing or plan to go into marketing? One hand? Okay. But you can't answer, unfortunately. All of these are more effective when you do something very specific. Marketing, we're trying to reach our customer, right? We're trying to understand our customer and give the customer what they want. Same thing with product and service design. And all of you with your business ideas have had to think about what market needs there are, what the customer wants and needs, and how to convey that to them. Sales, the same thing. We're trying to find a value proposition that really will meet the needs of the person that we're trying to sell a product or service to. Fundraising, we're trying to fill an emotional need for someone to try to convince them to give us money. All of these things are applicable to your pitch presentations. Communications, relationships, persuasion, and arguments, all of these are more effective. You're more likely to get your way if you take on the perspective of the audience. Question?
Yeah, because in the terms of the fundraising, like all others, you have a benefit, a surplus for the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
But and you have like target market, the consumer that you like appreciate the product or whatever. But with the fundraising, it's not like what is there like?
Good question. There is definitely a give and take with fundraising. You want me to give you money, and you have to find some reason why I would want to give that money to you. One, a possible thing, and if you think about maybe listening to the radio or some of the pitches that you've heard, people asking for fundraising money, they might talk about donate to us and you can have a tax break. So that's a benefit to me. They might say, oh, look at this very sad story about this animal or this person. Oh, don't you think that we need to do something about this? That fills an emotional need for me, so I will give you the money. Politics, same thing. This candidate is so important. This candidate will give us what we want. You need to give us money so we can help elect this candidate using marketing, etc. That's a great question. All of these things are more effective when we consider a shift in our mind toward looking for the value in our audience. Appealing to audience style. Yes?
Question. So the purpose of the presentation is to raise money or to raise the money when we present our ideas online.
That's what I understood.
Okay.
So when you do your pitch presentations, you're going to be asking for funding, correct?
So using fund, raising money is the most important part of the presentation.
That is the outcome.
The outcome.
Yeah. And the outcome, of course, is you want the money, but in order to get the money, you have to find the value for your audience in order for them to choose your project and give you the money. Right? Okay, so our next slide is going to be talking about social style, and that's where the Harrington reading comes in. It's about a 12-page article, but we're just going to be focusing down on the next slide on a few pages from that. Okay, so social style, we've got 4 different social styles that we categorize down. How many of you have ever taken a personality test? They have colored ones. I think some of you, when you come into U of M, you take the colored test. Yes, there's many, many, many different ones. We're just going to be talking about one of the samples of not really personality tests, but relational style tests. I like this one. It came out of Ross School. I know that it's being used very, very widely in different businesses. And so this is the framework that I want us to think about in adapting to our audience and also kind of evaluating what our judges might want. Okay, social style affects how we communicate and affects the type of pitch that we put forth. How? What's the first thing that can change? Could you read it for me? Format. Read the second one for me too.
Use of support, persuasive strategies.
Okay, could you read the next one?
Connections to outputs.
Okay, could you, Thunderbird, could you read the next one?
The level of details.
Okay, and last one up at the top. Could you read it for me?
Selection of themes.
Excellent. These are all very important things that we have to think about when designing our pitches. Visually, in delivery, the type of content that we use, and a lot of that is determined by understanding our audience and understanding what they might need. So, flip over to the tab within the Harrington article. Go down to page 8. I can post if you want, and I knew that we wouldn't have time for it within this workshop, but I can post a little quiz that Shan's already taken that kind of puts you on a scale of what is your strongest of these different dynamics. Whether you're more amiable, more expressive, more analytic, or more of a driver. So with the Harrington article in front of you, on page 8, the first one that we see is the amiables. So tell me, from someone who is able to review the article ahead of time, tell me what an amiable is. When we talk about amiables, what is an amiable and why is it important?
This is the same RLL test that we put with like
What's first and last? In what class?
it's positive.
Very likely, very likely. We're very proud of this research. Yeah. Okay, so good. Now that you know it, what's the amiable?
This is more like the team spirit and collaborative way.
Mm-hmm.
That is very like willing to aware of like working with the others versus teams like put the people ahead of them. So they're very like able to share very like collaborative.
Excellent. Since I haven't had a lot of pickup, I think maybe people haven't read, flip then over to page 7. We've got a little breakout that will make this a lot easier for us. The amiable is a relational style that wants to collaborate with people. They want to connect with people. They're very concerned with everyone in the group having a say in things. Let's look at some words that describe the amiable relational style. Supportive. Is everyone looking at the same thing right now? Okay, good. Supportive, respectful, friendly, cooperative, personal, and relationship-oriented. Keep this in mind. If we look at the analytic, could you read some of the analytic qualities for me?
Cautious, serious, accurate, detailed, logical, thinking-oriented.
Okay. Hopefully some of you guys are thinking about some of these words and thinking, where might I fit in within these 4 different groups? Could you in the back read for me about expressives?
Enthusiastic, dramatic, spontaneous, creative, visionary, and intuition-oriented.
Okay, excellent. And we'll have a reader from over here. Not you because you're not ready. Could you read for me about drivers?
Sorry, I'm not able to progress. I'm just here to facilitate the workshop.
Okay, you're not following along then?
No.
Are you following along?
Sure.
Driver, please.
Sure. Direct, decisive, efficient, pragmatic, and action-oriented.
Okay, so there are tests that we can do to fit within one of these different structures. And we know that everybody's going to have a little bit of all of these. My guess is a lot of you might most associate yourself with analytic and possibly amiable. Think about it for a second. Do you think that that might be a fitting guess? And again, this is a guess. Not for you. What do you think you might be?
The first one.
The amiable?
Amiable.
Okay. Who feels like they might not be an analytic or amiable? Is that a wave or a No, I'm calling. Okay, wonderful. What do you think you most strongly associate with of these 4 groups?
I think, as you mentioned, everybody have different faces.
Absolutely.
Depending on the situation, I think I could be expressive or analytic.
Okay, excellent, wonderful. Is there anyone in the group who feels like they don't have a strong analytic background? Okay, wonderful. Are you presenting?
No.
Okay.
Videotaping.
Videotaping. Okay, so as we look at this, these are some words. You can read through the article a little bit more as you have time. I can post a quiz if you're interested in this sort of thing. I can email it and have it posted to the website for you if you're interested. This is something that you will learn as you go through and get into Ross. So it will come up and be visited over and over and over again for you. Very quickly, if we think about these 4, there's a lot that we could talk about. But let's think about these different dynamics. Asking questions versus making statements. Showing emotion versus controlling emotion. The reason that this is important is because we have to think about ourselves and the way that we communicate, the way that we try to persuade, and we also have to think about the audience and what is going to be most effective for them. Okay? Flip now, please, to your sheet of paper or your laptop, the tab that has the judges' profiles on them. If this is your audience, we have to make a few assumptions, and again, these are stereotypes, they are assumptions, but sometimes stereotypes exist for a reason, and we look for context clues to build up these assumptions. We try to figure out what our audience wants and what style we can use and how we can adapt our presentation to appeal most to them. Harrington, as we see on pages 8 through 10, gives us little hints. For instance, if we are more analytical, things that we can do to appeal to different types of personality groups. Okay, so as you're looking through the judges' bios, I have the feeling that maybe you haven't received them maybe before, so please take a moment and read through them. We're going to look for some context clues to try to build up some understanding of what styles these judges might be. When you've finished reading, please look up at me so I know that we can go on.
see everything. We're shifting between the Harrington article and the bios,
Which might be more difficult on a phone. A few of you look up, but not all of you. Again, please look up at me and let me know when you've done reading, and we'll be able to dissect together. Just based on time, I'm going to go ahead. If you haven't finished reading, no problem. Just go along with us. If we look at this first judge, Jenny Liu, right? She is in how would you describe her?
She's a leader in manufacturing industry, and then she comes from a business background.
Absolutely. She's got her MS in International Business from Ohio State. We won't hold that against her. But she's got a business background. She's the CEO of a manufacturing company. She's also in charge of other different companies. We look at some of her awards. She was the president of the Taiwanese Chamber of Commerce in 1999, recipient of Michigan Top 10 Businesswomen Award in 2001, Presidential Award from, another award from Taiwan. If we had to fit this woman, who also looks pretty young to have done all this stuff, if we had to make assumptions about this woman based upon the 4 different categories of relational styles, where would you put her?
I saw this woman has very strong leadership skills. I would put her like in driver and expressive.
I totally agree with driver. I don't know, maybe she is very expressive, but driver for sure is exactly what I thought. How many of you thought that as well? Driver? Yes? Good. Write that down or type it in. As we look at Emily, she's a senior manager at KPMG. She's been doing audit for more than 7 years. Lists out all the specific types of audit that she's done. She provides professional audit experience to large companies, and she has extensive experience in audits, SEC filings, and global audit engagements. She also looks pretty young. She's done a lot, 7 years of doing this very hard work. KPMG and other audit consulting-based functions, it's hard work. You're working a long lot of hours. And she has all this specific experience that she's listed as far as the exact type of audit experience that she's done. What do we think about her? Analytic, absolutely. Please write it in. Her work is so specific and so detailed. She does global audit. She works for all these big companies. She's really achieved. She's been doing audit and consulting for 7 years. She's been involved in a lot of different industries, analytic for sure. Again, we are all a mixture of all the different types, but this is probably her strongest. And a lot of this, when we're trying to think about our audience and really understand them and adapt our presentation styles to them, we have to think about what they might be wanting, how we can best appeal to them. If we look at David Bloom, his bio is a lot longer. He's smiling, right? Big, warm smile. What are some things that we think about David Bloom?
He's definitely an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Very innovative.
Yes, innovative and entrepreneur. What are some of the things that he does? Not his entrepreneur stuff, but his work stuff.
Mentorship.
He does mentorship with students. What else does he do?
He's a coach.
He's a coach. What else? He writes. He's a mentor. He teaches. He's a coach. He's been involved in all these different innovative things that he started up. A lot of my research when I went through grad school was on different types of leaders and how leadership has to change as a business kind of changes and evolves. This guy is probably that first type, that visionary entrepreneur that starts a business but who gets bored after some time, and when it comes to the regulation and the rules and the business is getting bigger and now we have to think about HR, he's not interested. He wants to start off on a new thing. What can we say, guessing wise, what can we say David Bloom might be within these four?
Expressive.
Probably expressive, very visionary. So once we've identified our judges, we'll go back to the Harrington article and we'll talk about some different techniques that we can use to appeal to that different type, okay? And if we look at Benjamin Nolan, there might be another thing about David Bloom, just one more thing. He's coaching, he's teaching, he's mentoring, he writes books, he's smiling, a big warm smile. I think he's probably got some amiable thrown in there too. Let's look at the next one, Benjamin Nolan. Benjamin works in banking, right? Yes. Lots of different positions. He also has a spread we see between Spain and Argentina. He went here. What are some things, looking at Benjamin Nolan's bio, that we might think about him? From which country are you? Brazil? Okay. And maybe I'm going to ask you for guidance on this too. What are some things that we can think about Benjamin Nolan? Probably a driver. He's achieved a lot. What else?
I mean, he's doing small business banking, so he has to interact with a lot of businesses and try to persuade them to get loans and stuff. So I guess he has to be really invested in relationships as well.
Mm-hmm. He has to be really focused on relationships. He's in banking, so he's got to be pretty analytic, right? And then we don't know how many years that he spent in the Latin American, Spain and Argentina, but he is fluent in Spanish, and the Spanish culture is typically a little bit more warm and expressive, the different style, and I could talk forever about cultural communication, but just trust me, I guess, when I say if he has this background, he's probably going to be a little bit more expressive and a little bit more warm than what we would typically think a banker would be. Okay? So he's going to maybe be a little bit of mix of everything. From his Latin side, he might be more expressive. He has to be analytic from his banking side. He's probably a driver because he's achieved a certain level of success. All of these people, in fact, have. And so now we understand a little bit more about our judges. And this is important because the judges are our audience. How can we adapt our presentations, our pitches, and the delivery that we give to these judges? How can we adapt our presentation and our style to fit the needs of these people? They all have some very different needs. There are some common themes, though. Common themes. All of these people are what? They're all a little bit drivers because they've all achieved a level of extraordinary success, right? So when we think about drivers and the trends that go along with drivers, those are going to be things that we want to pull into our presentation. Okay? Also, we've got two different people that are working with banking and analytics, right? Banking and audit. So we have to think that that's important, that 50% of our audience works with numbers very, very heavily. And so we have to think about that analytic perspective as well. Okay? So keep that in mind. Our main focus is appealing to drivers and to analytics, but we do have some amiable and some expressiveness that's within the group as well. Yes.
Wouldn't it be very shallow to judge people just based on their bio?
It's totally shallow, 100% shallow. But this is what we have to do. We have to put ourselves in a situation where we make assumptions based upon stereotypes. It is not always going to be right. However, we can look at trends and say that that gives us an advantage over people that just present based upon how they normally feel about it. But it's totally shallow. You're right. As you get to know judges and as you go on in your lives pitching different business ideas to angel investors, to venture capitalists, the best way, of course, is to form that relationship with them so you understand their needs more clearly and more closely, and you can tailor then better to them. All we have is this, so that's all we have to go on. But very good point. There was another couple hands, yes.
My question is, just now you suggest us to their speaking style maybe. I mean, most of them maybe they're driver, but are you suggesting us to use the driver style to cater for their needs? I mean, intuitively, it's like a strong husband don't want a strong wife. So, yeah, do you think it really fits them?
Yes. Yes, I do. What we're doing is we're not changing ourselves. We're just changing the way that we deliver information to meet the needs that they have. That's all we're doing.
So you mean that they tend to use very driver's style when they are pitching, so that if we use the same style, we might be like people.
Yes. They have the driver style because it's not a personality style, but it's a relational style. This is the way they care about information. Let's go back to, maybe this will answer your question, let's go back to the Harrington article and let's look up drivers within the writings on page 8 through 10. Projected profit, return, all of these things are going to be very important to a driver. To an expressive, what might be more important?
Big picture.
The big picture. To an amiable, what might be the most important thing? Emotion, making sure every perspective has been really brought in and all the different mindsets have really been considered. The driver, not so much. So we tailor our presentation to focus down on numbers, results, outcomes, and it's very clear. We don't waste a lot of time. We don't have a lot of text on our slides. Everything is very, very clear and tended toward results.
Regarding outline, so there you can always like show an outline saying this is what I'm going to do, or you can build it saying make it like part of it and flow with a clear transition. So which way you think works better for the drivers? Just to show it like,
Okay, so remember the agenda that I had up at the beginning? And the first one was highlighted, and now we're going to the next one, and that's highlighted, number 2. I think that for the drivers, this is the best. They can see exact, and you can even make it more clear than this, where you're highlighting the whole strip behind the number. They see exactly the progression that's going on. The problem that we face in working with drivers is, and just in general, we understand the content and the material that we're presenting better than anybody else. We understand it. We understand all the background, all the history. We want to share everything. They don't care. So when we think that we're setting an effective transition and then just going smoothly like water through the presentation, no. Make it clear for them. And these are all people who have been in the U.S. as well. That makes them even more inclined to be a driver culturally than if they were from other countries. They've been working, living here in the U.S., successful in business, so make it clear. It might be more poetic to go through and wind through transitions. There is definitely the risk that they're not going to follow you there, and that makes you not as effective. So for drivers, I would definitely do this, and you can even make it stronger by bolding out different colors or different bands behind the color. Whatever you choose, make it consistent. But I suggest absolutely doing this agenda and making that signpost at every point through the different parts of your presentation. Okay? So how can we appeal to them? We talked about style. What information do they want to know? We talked about that. Keep these things in mind. As you read through more, we talked about some side styles, but we know that in general, these people are judging a competition for entrepreneurship. They are business leaders. They're in the States. They've been successful. They're probably, the dominant style for all of them will be driver. It's not a bad idea to know what we know about the two men. They might have a little bit more amiable or a little bit more expressive to them. So we can actually tailor our Q&A answers if they ask. We can tailor our Q&A questions to them directly by making it more relationship oriented or making it more expressive in the way that we talking about emotions, these sorts of things. That may appeal on a superficial level. That may appeal to these two members of the audience, but we'll leave it at driver for the main presentation, and Q&A we can change it up a little bit, especially if we get questions from them. Okay? So now on to persuasion basics. This is talking very quickly about an article that I use in my classes. Congress, the article, it comes from HBR. He talks about 4 different steps to persuasion. And what is a pitch if not a persuasion? We want to establish credibility. We want to frame for common ground with our audience. We want to provide evidence appropriately. And we want to connect emotionally. So we've got a few different slides on credibility. Who can read this first quote for me? I will call someone if I don't get it. Yes.
You're credible if your audience believes you have expertise and are trustworthy based on your character, reputation.
Okay, so you guys are at a little bit of a disadvantage in talking about experience because you're students, and some of you are freshmen. No offense to freshmen, but we've got to then build up our credibility in some other way. It doesn't have to necessarily be that we've already set up 50 different successful companies, but we've got to find some value, something that we can provide that's really going to show that we're a credible source, especially for the people that don't have a ton of experience in setting up businesses already. That means that this pitch is your opportunity to make yourself seem credible. We'll talk when we get to delivery how we can do that. How do you establish credibility generally? Try to spend time with your audience as you go through your careers and try to do different angel investment pitches or to different venture capitalists. Trying to get to know them ahead of time and understanding a little bit more about their relational style will definitely help you. As you know, those of you who have ties with China, the relationships outside in business, we think about relationships in the U.S. versus relationships in other parts of the country, other parts of the world. In the U.S., we have a really strong rule of law, so the relationships aren't as important to us. Because if somebody does a breach of contract, oh, I'll sue you. If somebody doesn't deliver on the date that they said they would, we'll threaten to sue them or sue them. Within different parts of the world, this is not always possible, and so the relationship and the trust has to be built up ahead of time, and that allows for credibility. So in the U.S., credibility is maybe less important because we're focused on results, driver, 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 and we have the law to protect us. In other parts of the world, this is not the case, and relationships and credibility will be paramount to being successful. Okay, so spending time with the audience is always the best. Introduce yourself effectively. How can we introduce ourselves effectively? Gray shirt at the top. Could you read for me the first one?
Spend time with your audience.
Oh, yes. Introducing yourself effectively, first one.
Oh, sorry. Mention credentials, previous success.
Okay, so this is what it means for you guys in doing your pitches. If you have pitched before and you've gotten money and you've had some sort of result, make sure that you bring that up, especially in the Q&A, maybe even in the introduction. if you've had many different classes, if you've been involved successfully in just about anything that can be related to this, keep that in mind as a way to build up your credibility. If you've only got 10 minutes to present your whole business idea, do you want to spend 2 minutes talking about the different classes that you've had at Ross or Thunderbird? No, you've got to use your time effectively, but if you can work that into Q&A somehow, absolutely do it. So think about past successes that you might have had, credentials, internships, whatever it is, and try to think about that effectively and work that into your presentation somehow, even if it's only in the Q&A. If you have the opportunity to do meet and greets beforehand or after, definitely work it in then. When you're doing networking, this is absolutely when you're starting to talk about these things. How many of you feel like, geez, I'm a little bit humble and I don't want to be talking about all the things that I've done, it makes me feel arrogant? How many feel like that? Stop it. Please stop it. When you're doing especially the networking, within the US, this is really important. Everybody does this. If you don't do it, it puts you at a disadvantage. However, you can frame it in a way that doesn't sound arrogant, making your face very lovely when you say the thing, just talking about, oh, this is similar to when I had this experience at such and such internship or such and such job, or even my parents' business is like this and we had something similar. So please try to think ahead and plan ahead for a way that you can mention your credentials and show previous success in a way that doesn't make you feel uncomfortable, because you need to do it. It's important for building credibility.
So basically, before we persuade somebody, we need to make ourselves more credible.
In whatever way is possible. The nice thing, as I understand it, for your pitch presentations, you guys have all delivered business plans already, right? And I assume that the judges will have read through all of the business plans, and so they have some background understanding a little bit about the business idea. Maybe you've included some information about yourself within that business plan. I don't know what model you chose for your plan. Did you include information about yourself and why you guys are the best candidates for this?
Yeah.
You didn't, some did. Okay, especially for this group, if you haven't, consider something, some sort of value that you bring that makes you the best people to do this idea, whatever it is, okay? Credibility will be important. These ladies were shaking their head, yes, we did it. So you gotta really do it. Okay? Reference relationships, again, for a pitch presentation, this might not be important, but if you have networking opportunities with them before or probably after, in the Q&A to mention that, oh yes, similar, just like the other one. I know this person, when I worked with this person before, da-da-da-da-da-da. It's name dropping. Is it shallow? Yes. It is. But you know what? It builds people's credibility. Simple as that. And people respond well to that in any culture. Connect with others who are credible, the same thing, referencing relationships. Okay, very quickly, these two slides. Different types of credibility. You can have rank credibility due to a position that you have. You guys are students. Expertise credibility due to personal knowledge. Maybe you have a program which is an app or something, and you have a computer programming background or have really been involved and interested in computers for 6 years. Bring it up here in an expertise way. Goodwill credibility due to a strong record of having the audience's best interests at heart. Again, you've got a 10 to, I think, just 10-minute presentation, right? So we can't go too far down this, but this is how you can bring goodwill credibility into your presentation. The product or the service that you are proposing, continually stress to think about how it's going to benefit all the stakeholders. It will save your customers time. It will save your customers money. It will bring return to the investors because it's doing this wonderful thing to help society somehow. So think about the benefits to your customers, and that is a way to build the goodwill credibility. Common ground credibility, a speaker is believed because of his or her similarity to the audience. You do know that one of your audience here is from the Ross School, graduated from here. You do know that we've got an Ohio State grad as a judge. 2 women and 2 men. So that's good to know. General audience factors. These 4 judges are going to be your most important audience members. But as I understand it, there's going to be 100 to 200 other people listening to your presentations as well. We have to not ignore them, and the way that we design our slides is also going to be affected by that number of people. Your judges will have the background knowledge from your business plans. My guess is your general audience will not. So some of the things we have to consider explaining a little bit, but when we get to the part where we talk about delivery and planning out exactly what we're going to be talking about when and how long we're going to be able to spend on each slide, really you're going to have to balance this, because your key audience is the judges. They have background knowledge. The rest of your audience, those 100 plus other people, they probably don't have the background understanding of your product or service, who you are, the value you bring, etc. So trying to bring in those basic points for the rest of the audience is just nice, but you do need to focus on the judges themselves, and they do have that background knowledge already. Thinking about attitude, attention spans, perception, and retention. Another reason why we use the agenda format is because it helps people remember things. They've done many, many different studies that I'll reference, but one of the most common is that a person, if they read it, they're more likely to, if they do it with their hands, they're most likely to remember. That's why we're having a breakout section in this class. If they read it, they're pretty likely to remember. If they hear it, they only remember it after, this is on average, about 19 times of hearing it. 19 times of hearing it. What does that mean for you when you're doing your pitches? If you have something important to say, you need to say it with your words. You need to have it up on the slides as well. Because us just saying something and building that into a lovely transition, they're probably going to miss it. On average, the average person, it takes them 19 times to remember something or retain it if they hear it. 19 times hearing the same thing. Can you believe that? It's crazy. And it's worse when they get older. It's really unfortunate. Very, very unfortunate. So anything that's important, repeat it. When we think about structuring our pitches, it's also a good idea if you have a few key points that you want to identify, build in an introduction where you highlight those key things, explain them in the body, and then in the conclusion, repeat them again. I mean, it's not 19 times, but 3 is better than 1. Not for everything, we only have 10 minutes, but keep in mind that the important things we should highlight often. Words on the visual and also in speaking at the same time, and if it's really important, such as you expect tremendous return, for instance, or a really quick time frame on that return, introduction, body, and conclusion. Remind them. Yes?
How about video?
Yeah.
Video, is it like last longer?
Video is tough because video, even like a 1-minute clip or something, how much are you going to be able to show in that 1 minute? And also, that's a whole minute of speaking that it's not structured. So use video, it brings in a lot of interest, and when we get to the visuals, we'll talk about that a little bit. But video can be hard because it takes up a lot of time. Plus you've got to go over, and unless you've embedded it, then you're clicking and you're opening and you're fumbling around a little bit. So if you're going to do video, either embed it or have it already pulled up, ready to go. I had some video actually that I wanted to bring into this presentation, but I keep looking at the time. We're not going to have time for that. No video. I can post the slides for you. You can link through them if you want to. But video can be tough. Be judicious, and when you do your practice, make sure that you pay attention to that. Attention span I will just very quickly mention because you can use this to your advantage, but know that in the middle, in the body of your presentation, people are most likely to be zoning off. So this is another reason why you should have an introduction, a body, and conclusion for most important things, because they're most attentive at the beginning, and then as soon as you say, and finally, or in conclusion, then their attention comes back again. So use this to your advantage. You can use signposts, and that's another reason why we do the agenda. You know, they can see, okay, we're at point 3 now in Sarah's presentation, but we're going to be to point 5 soon, and that's going to be great. We allow them to kind of follow along and know what to expect, using things like first, second, third in the way that you speak, using numbers and orders helps. All these things, we try to get over the fact that we know in the middle of our presentation, they're going to be zoning a little bit. What's another thing that we can do to gain attention? Think about delivery. We could ask the audience a question, such as I just did. We could just try to be a little bit more expressive in the way that we speak that tries to pull that attention back in. Just anything different. People respond to things that are a little different. Maybe it's making a noise within your presentation instead of a video. Consider all these things in the middle. Unless we're really interesting, people can fall off a little bit. Okay, now on to visuals. A lot of great visuals. I'm going to come back to this right at the end. These are some different samples that I think are quite good. I want you to keep a few things in mind as far as visuals, which are not up on the slide. See, this is in the middle, the part where I thought, I'll have them write things in, because they're going to be zoning off. Here are some rules for visuals. You should, and I did not necessarily follow this rule myself on some of these slides, like this one, you should have no more than 6 lines of text down, and those lines should have no more than 6 words in each of them. Now I have to tell you something. How many of you have heard of Steve Jobs? Okay, yeah. Back in the day, they would create these PowerPoint slides like this, and okay, you don't have to do PowerPoint, you can do a Prezi or something for your presentation. But back in the day, the presentations were very long, very text-laden, and it was really kind of difficult. In consulting and some other businesses, they still use this older style with tons and tons of text. Don't do that. Don't do it. You have 100 to 200 people in your audience. They cannot read it. And furthermore, even if they can read it, they're not going to be looking at you if there's all this text up there. So make it easy for yourself and follow at least this rule of 6 and 6. Yes, I know I've broken it on a few slides. Sometimes you need to break it a little bit. But what I'd like to advocate for you to do, and when you go on and look at these visuals, I'll pop them up while we're doing the breakout section, I guess. A lot of these have very few words. Very, very few words. What Steve Jobs kind of brought to presentations and pitches was the idea that you have one big picture that really stands out and gets people's attention. One big number, and then he'll talk for 30 seconds about what that number means. Consider these things because they're becoming more and more successful, more and more common, more and more innovative. And when we think about the slide decks as I have them up for you here, this is kind of like old school. I mean, I have to do it like this because, you know, for classes and things like that, you have to be able to write things down. If I don't have it like this, you've got to write everything down, which, you know, people are zoning off, then maybe I'll start doing that. But I need to have the information up here for classes as a teacher. But for a pitch presentation, consider what is it that I can express in a big picture or in a big number that I don't need a lot of text for. Because that big picture or that big number will also grab people's attention. Okay? And we'll come back to the visuals as we have time. Okay, now on to delivery. See, we're already on 4. Great. This is one of the bad slides. Sorry. See? Do you see what I mean when you look at it? It's just so much. It's just too much. I took some of it out, too, and put it somewhere else. Organization and content. Develop an elevator pitch. So, we've not all had LHC. What is an elevator pitch?
It's a really short pitch, and in this short amount of time, you need to pitch your audience and make them know what is the highlight of your whatever product, company.
Exactly. It's about 120 seconds, 2 minutes. So you've got to condense, and keep in mind you've developed this business idea. You've worked at it and worked at it. There's so much involved. You want to convey so much. Put it down into less than 2 minutes. Focus on what's absolutely most important, the 1 or 2 results that are going to be most important to your audience, the most important service. Maybe your product or service offers lots of different benefits to customers. Focus on the 1 or 2 that are going to be easily taken away. Elevator pitch is called that way if you get into an elevator with somebody. If any of you want to go on to doing work like this, entrepreneurial work, I've got to tell you something. Or economic development or sales or anything, more opportunity will come your way if you are able to use these chance happenings. Absolutely no question. Is it often going to be you getting into the elevator with somebody? No. But is it going to be you're in a meeting with someone and you kind of, jog your way over very quickly and have this little tiny speech that they're trying to leave. They don't really want to talk with you, but you're walking along with them and you give them your little pitch. Absolutely important. Maybe you're passing somebody in the hall. Having an elevator pitch for anything that you want, whether it's a pitch for a product or service and funding, whether it's getting your parents to give you more money to let you go on some big trip, whatever it is, getting your significant other to do something, whatever it is, having the practice of condensing down what you want and the benefits, obviously, that it provides the audience is a very good idea. 100%, absolutely, for your life, practice taking all of the things that you like and condensing them into elevator pitches, wrapped around the benefit and the style that it brings to the other person. Okay? Good lesson in life. So develop the elevator pitch. Yes, I'm advocating that you actually have an elevator pitch within your pitch presentation. Probably even shorter than 120 seconds because you've only got 10 minutes to begin with. Answer the so what very clearly. I think it's important when you're developing your pitch presentations to think about the nastiest person who could be sitting in on that presentation, the toughest teacher you've ever had, the really critical somebody that you know, and give your speech imagining that that person is listening to it. Always answer the so what and answer it very clearly. Very clearly. Use concrete examples. Practicing and revising is incredibly important. I think it's a good idea to speak out loud to friends or even to practice on videotape and watch yourself. I realize that the time is kind of tight. Your slide decks are due on the 9th, right? And today's the 8th. And you're actually giving the speech when? The 10th. Okay, so we've got a tight time frame, but success could be yours. Practice is a good thing. Discover the more effective you are, really and sincerely. Confident, energetic delivery. Verbals. Switch up volume, pace, articulation. If you're very excited about something, yes, it's okay to speak quickly. Things that are very important, your main points, say them slowly. One of the things they say about Bill Clinton and indeed Barack Obama, they're excellent public speakers. Despite what you think of them politically, excellent public speakers. And something that they both do is they slow down their speech a little bit. Keep in mind that you know this topic, this service or this product, this idea that you're pitching, you know it so well, but your audience doesn't. So by speaking just a little bit more slowly, especially at the important parts, it allows their brains to catch up with yours because they don't have the background and the understanding that you have about this thing. And the whole point of being effective is getting them to remember, right? Nonverbals. Oh, and avoid fillers. I think that's a common sense. Facial expressions, eye contact and coverage, again in the US, absolutely smile. Absolutely. In many other cultures, you look silly and ridiculous if you're smiling all the time. In the US, please do it. In fact, what I want you to do, and I know you're not all going to do it, But what I want you to do is as soon as you walk out, before anyone says anything, or before you're part of the speech, I want you to take a deep breath and smile. I want you to do it. I really do. I know you're not gonna, all of you, but those of you who do, it's just a way to build a little bridge with the audience, and that's a good thing. We want to connect with them emotionally. So facial expressions, eye contact. If you are petrified and nervous about making eye contact, just focus at the top of the judges' heads. And, I mean, unless they're really close, and then they can tell that you're just looking at the top of their head. But try to maintain eye contact with them. They say that ideally you should hold eye contact for 3 seconds with someone. I don't know. I think that's a little creepy. But try to make contact with people, and especially if you have an aside, or especially if you're answering a question specifically to someone, holding for that 3 seconds, it's important. Okay? Gestures, movements, time management, professionalism. This is something, are you guys going to have clickers, or are you going to have somebody clicking for you? Clicker? Okay, I want to tell you, I want to show you something. I want to show you something. This is what you're all going to want to do, because this is what everybody does. You get up, you have a clicker, or you have note cards or something, and you put your hands like this, because it's natural, and then throughout the rest of the presentation, you're going to be doing this. And you're going to look like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So, make the conscious effort, just like walking out, deep breath, and smiling. What I want you to do is mentally force yourself, if you've got the clicker in one hand or note cards in one hand, force yourself to put one hand down. Force yourself. Because this, everybody does it. Everyone. And it looks silly. Especially if the whole group, you're standing up and all of you. It's really bad. So force yourself to put one hand down. Try not to shift. This is why it's good to videotape yourself, because shifting happens. If you're standing up and you've got 5 people presenting, for instance, and all of you are presenting, and the one person is talking, don't think that just because they're talking that no one's looking at you. If you're doing this, if you are getting your hands in your pockets, bless. Shannon wasn't in your class, but the other day I had students doing a presentation, and a guy is up there adjusting himself. Adjusting himself. So keep in mind that if you're standing up there, you are not talking, but you're still on. So perhaps consider with your group mates who are going to be standing up with you, wearing similar colors, maybe all of you adopting the same stance, whether it's hands back here or hands back here if they're not speaking. And if you are speaking and you have a clicker, naturally you're going to want to bring this arm up. Force yourself to put this arm down. You can still be animated and have movement. Watch what I'm going to do here. Not too much movement, just a little shift. We're going to step, turn, other hand down. Not doing this. Not going to do it. You are not going to do it, none of you. Okay. Collaborative presentations. This is a way to structure, maybe you've already done this. How many of you have decided the way you're going to present? Is only one person presenting, or all of you have to present? How is it going? All of you have to present? Huh? You're the only one? Yeah. Oh, goodness. Okay. A lot of pressure on you. You might want the video later. Those of you who are doing collaborative, where you're all presenting, some different styles. We're just going to talk about the symposium, and we're actually not going to talk. I thought I did so. Symposium, 2 different styles. I want you to, for those of you that have even 2 people up, I want you to choose an informal, I want you to choose somebody, not to say that they're the best, but I want you to choose a team leader or a moderator. And that moderator or the team leader should be the one who knows the most about this product or service that you're pitching and can effectively build transitions between the different points of your presentation, and also can dole out question and answers. There's nothing worse than a really great collaborative presentation where people are standing up and they're all talking, and everybody's good, and then it comes to the Q&A, and it's just a disorganized mess, where they get the question, they're all leaning out, and they're all looking at each other, and who's going to take it, and oh, do you want to take it, or they're both starting at the same time. So the moderator allows this not to happen. All the questions come into the moderator, and the moderator can say, with his or her expert knowledge of the topic, and also the different sections that people are presenting on, oh, Sarah, could you speak to that a little bit? And if I can't, because I've just become so nervous, then the moderator's going to have to cover for me while I'm panic stricken. But the moderator is a good idea because it allows that professionalism to go all the way through to the Q&A, and also make sure that you don't have a situation where, and I know it would never happen in this group, but in other groups it might happen, unfortunately. Probably not at Ross. I don't know how Thunderbird is. That's a joke. Sometimes you've seen group presentations where people are up talking and doing their little bits, and one person says something, and then somebody else in the group says something that's dissimilar. This symposium style with the moderator allows for that not to happen as easily because there's an overarching organizer. Okay, so moderator does introductions, transitions, conclusions, and then introduces, if you want, the different other speakers who are going to be talking and what they're going to be speaking on. This will happen at the same time that the updated agenda goes through. So at every transition, you'll have a new agenda slide, and the moderator will introduce something, or just say, Sarah will speak about such and such. And then I get up and speak about it. Okay, another one which I don't necessarily suggest, but it might work for you. The moderator comes up with a problem, and then the different people are talking about maybe criteria for solving, the solution itself, maybe somebody on implementation, somebody on limitations. You can go kind of chronologically like that as well. And the forum for Q&A, again, the moderator is going to take all the questions in and then direct the questions out to the different group members if it is a collaborative presentation, so it looks professional all the way through. Okay, prepare for potential questions. Think about implementation and timeframes. These are things that might be asked during a Q&A session. Many of them, hopefully, you've identified already in your business plan, but I just put some things up that I thought might come up. Be thinking as you're driving home or walking or taking your bike or whatever, think about that nasty person that's going to be evaluating you, and you're kind of preparing and answering all the what ifs. Think about that nasty person and what they might ask, where the holes in your presentation exist, and how you can fill them. Okay? So here were just some sample ones that I thought. Obviously, cost is going to be a huge one. Implementation and timeframes is going to be probably pretty important. Competitor actions. Think about other competitors, things that they're doing, if they're on time frame to similarly have something done. External considerations like media, additional financing, any number of different things. Internal, different marketing opportunities. Partner considerations, and those partner considerations obviously are going to be things like vendors that are going to be selling your product or service within the different channels, suppliers. If you only have one supplier, for instance, and there may be unstable, that could be a difficult thing, and that might come up in a Q&A. So these were just some general things I thought of. Applying the breakout and review. Last thing. And also keep in mind, this is our conclusion, remember? So the agenda sets forth the things that I think are important. The conclusion wraps them all back up together. I do have an appendix item for you, which is a sample, and the visuals. Right after we get through this, I'll go back to the visuals. I wanted to make sure we had time. These are the most important things that I want you to keep in mind. Appeal to your audience, both in style and also in the value proposition. What value is this product or service going to bring to them? What value is this going to propose to all the stakeholders? We want to build our own credibility however we can, and I do some of my best thinking when I'm just like walking or doing random things. So be thinking about credibility as you're just kind of walking over the next day or two. Frame and organize your information appropriately. The appendix item that I have is a sample. Slide 1 should be this, slide 2 should be this, slide 3 this. Balance your visual resonance and information. We'll go back to the visual slide in a minute. Manage your delivery with all the things that we've covered there. And apply these concepts to your slide deck. I will walk around and review as you need. Okay. Do you have any questions while I'm pulling up the visuals? Yes.
Except for the 4 judges, what is the other audiences?
I was told that you would have, I was told that there were going to be about 200 other people. Is that not the case? 100 to 200?
We're actually expecting 100 to 150.
100 to 150.
These are just estimates based on previous years.
Does that make you happy or sad?
Are they voting?
Yes, they will be voting, and their votes will become towards 15% of your total scores. 15 on side. So bring your friends.
Yeah, that's good information to know. See if you shift between different presentations. This is awkward. Okay, on these slides, this is what I actually took and put into your appendix. Pass some of these out. You could pass that. I don't know if you guys care or not. This is on SlideShare, and it goes through. This is a really horrible way to present, by the way. Look at how tiny that is. It just goes through, and this is a sample, slide by slide, what he feels is a good idea. All of the samples that I have are slightly different. Keep in mind that the style and what you have slide by slide by slide, there's no best way, but they all say that they're the best way. So that's why my presentation didn't have a lot of information about that, but I did put 4 very different styles that you can kind of choose and pick from. This one is the most complete. Do keep in mind when you're thinking about your presentations, roughly it's said that you should spend about 30 to 60 seconds per slide. But again, if you do this more Steve Jobs style, where it's just a big, strong visual, a big, strong number, you might not have 60 seconds of content to talk about. I think as long as you're not flipping every 15 seconds the whole time, it's fine. But so as far as number of slides, he's got 15 listed, and then also lists out a number of additional appendix items that you probably should prepare. If we know that we've got 2 analytics in the group with banking backgrounds, having detailed financials is going to be important. Drivers are going to be looking at results, so time frames and timelines will be important. Shan, did you have?
Yeah. So for the appendix, is actually what I want to ask. So we have some materials that we don't want to include in the main presentation, but we expect the judges to ask. Should we pull out the appendix slides during them answering questions? During us answering questions.
Mm-hmm. If you have those slides in your appendix, and you can even when you come up to the questions, the Q&A part, I think a good way to deal with this, because you've done the work anyway, is just instead of your blank slide that just says something like questions with a, please don't use that horrible stick figure that's kind of like scratching his head like this. Please don't use that. Or please don't use a light bulb either. What a good thing to do is you can have a title that just says questions, and then you can even within the body of your slide put appendix items, and so they can look up and see like, wow, this group, they really did it. They really brought it. So that's how I would handle it, but you can That's why it's good to anticipate questions. I've had groups, student groups before that gave a presentation, it was a good presentation, and then I asked a follow-up question about a competitor, and boom, they had it right there in the appendix. They knew exactly what the different groups were doing, different competitors. And that looks like, wow, I'm impressed. They anticipated what I was going to ask. They might not have brought it into the presentation because within the time frame they didn't feel like it was core, but thinking about competitors, thinking about time frames, thinking about costs and breaking those out for the drivers, it's going to be important. Having those in the appendix is a good idea. Listing them out on your question slide lets them know that you're really complete. Okay? So this one I'll just kind of go through. We'll look at the visuals on it. This is nice, not because it looks great, because it really doesn't. But oftentimes, if we're too fluffy, that can take away and distract as well. So you really have to balance for the product and service that you are offering. How busy, what kind of theme do you want to pick? We know that we talked about drivers and we talked about how different personality styles can affect everything. The content that we put in, analytics are going to want a ton of information, but we only have so much time period, so we build an appendix to answer that. Drivers are going to want hard facts and results. Those are the things that we should be focusing on, even if it's just projections. Amiables and expressives. Expressives will want the whole big picture. Who was the guy, the third judge? What was his name? Yes, David Bloom. He's probably going to want to see the whole picture. So having a slide that has milestones or something like that, that we came up with this idea at such and such point, we've already started business and we've gotten 500 hits at this point, 5,000 hits at this point, whatever it is, having a milestone type of slide in the appendix will probably be good for a David Bloom. Elevator pitch slide, this is the way that he describes it. And I can send these slides out, so this is the very first link within the visual slide. If you want to go through, I liked it not because it looks great, but it does have a few things that I do like and I want to point out to you. Logo. Do you all have logos for your business ideas? Logo should be on every single slide. You know another thing that I really like? And I think it's important, especially for pitches, I want you to number every single slide. And that's important because does the audience, do your judges get copies of the slide decks beforehand?
They don't.
They don't? Okay.
They see as everything.
Okay, wonderful. If they have a question about something, they might note a certain slide. It's going to be a lot easier for you to go back and identify what slide that was if they can pick a number and you can go directly back to a number. So numbering is just a nice organization tool to help you. It's not a bad thing necessarily to do kind of a boring presentation, just white with black. But what I do want you to do is pick a font. Don't pick Times New Roman. No Times New Roman. No any of these fonts that have little like squiggles off, like the T's and the R's. Don't do any of those. So Calibri is a pretty good font to use. You don't have to use it, but use a font that's very clear and not a lot of little extra stuff. We call these fonts sans serif because sans without the little flourish. Okay? So those are good things to keep in mind. Again, you should do 6 by 6, no more. If you have to be a little bit flexible with that, that's okay. The font size, smallest font size that you should use should be, they say 18, but I think for up to 150 people in an auditorium, your font size should probably be no less than 22. At the very smallest, 22. 24 would be safer. And again, we have to balance that for the size of the space and how far back people are. But if you pick a sans serif font, Probably 22 would be the smallest you would want to go for 150 people. Okay. While I'm pulling up the next one, let's just use the next 20 minutes to those of you who are with groups or even on your own, start looking at your presentations as you've prepared them already and start applying some of these concepts. I'm going to stay here for 20 more minutes. I do want to pull up some of the other visuals to give you ideas of things, but I want to be able to use this time. If you want me to come and look at your presentations, I'm happy to do that. If you want to take off, no problem.
Quick question, what do you think about the background of the slides? Is lighter the better or dark background the better?
What they say is that the most visually appealing, easiest to read on the eyes is actually a dark background with white font. And I think that that's probably true. I mean, I don't know about you guys. When I look at a computer screen for like 7 hours straight, my eyes hurt afterwards. But, you know, they're not going to be sitting for that long. But what's the typical common knowledge is dark screen, white lettering, but then probably you're going to use bold a lot on that lettering or use a bigger font to make sure that it's visual, really shows out.
Okay, so during Q&A, what if one of the judges asks us a question that we actually don't know how to answer? How can we be polite and say like, oh, we'll get back to you after we do more research and apologize? Should we
No. Oh, this is a great question. I probably should have addressed this when we talked about the Q&A. How to deal with a question that you don't know how to answer. I think probably honesty is the best thing. Don't seem to be fumbling around. What I would say very simply, well, there's a few different things I would do. I'd breathe and smile, because that buys me about 1.5 seconds of like, oh my gosh time in my head, right? And then, you know what else I'd do? I'd repeat back the question. And then I'd say something like, oh, very good question, or I'd repeat back the question, oh, the detailed financials about such and such. Yes, very good question. That's like a 4-second stall that I have going in my mind trying to figure out and organize how I'm going to answer this question. If I still don't have an answer after the breathe and smile stall, and then the repeat and complimenting them on their great question, which is also superficial, if I still haven't thought of a good way to organize and respond at that point, or if I just know that I don't have an answer, if I know that I don't have an answer, I can just simply say, that is a really great question. That wasn't part of the scope of what we prepared for this presentation, but I'd be happy to follow with you afterward. That's also a great opportunity for you to do some networking. So if you know that you don't know the answer, if you know that you haven't prepared it, that's a great question. It's outside of the scope of what we prepared for today, but I'd love to follow up with you about it. I'll see you after the presentation. Do the swap of business cards, send that thank you email, and do follow up with them the next day or as soon as you can. Any other questions before I pull up the visuals? Yes?
So would it be good if I have a concept that I want to pitch and I repeat it over and over?
Well, it would probably be very memorable if you repeated it over and over, but I don't know if it would be the best use of your time. What I suggest is to organize and structure your slides and your visuals. I think you weren't in yet, maybe maybe you were. When we talked about people remember things that they've heard on average if they've heard it 19 times. But we can't say that because we've got so much more to cover. So the very important things, your concept, you want to build into kind of like an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. So you tell them what you're about to tell them, you explain it and build it out, and then you remind them what you just told them. And at the same time, you've got it up on the screen because people are also more likely, oftentimes, certainly for academics, this is true, more likely to remember things that they've read versus things that they've heard. So I wouldn't repeat it over and over again, but if it's really important, yeah, I would build your structure out in an introduction, body, and conclusion. For a pitch, that introduction is what? We're drawing bridges here. We talked about something, it was roughly 120 seconds maximum. The elevator pitch. So when we talk about a pitch presentation, your introduction is like your elevator pitch. And then your conclusion is just a good idea in any slide. the sample that I have on your handout, I don't think that it has a conclusion listed, but they do have a closing slide listed. Same thing. Yes.
So in this sense, is the elevator pitch like the executive summary for the presentation?
Exactly. Exactly. Any other questions? Okay, I'll pull up the second visual, which is very different looking than this one. Very slow to load. Okay, so this one is a lot more visually impressive, right? And as we scroll through, we just see different visuals. It's very strong. This is more like the Steve Jobs style that I was talking about, just a few different words. And okay, their words go along with how you should develop the slide. But that's why I like this slide deck as an example for you, because not only do they have a different sample, a different way of organizing. This one only has 11 slides versus the 15 plus the appendix. But it shows a different style that's more visual, only a few words. And of course, then that relies on you building those connections with your speaking as more important. You'll see, obviously, similarities between all of these. Should you use pictures of the team members? I think so. Why? What?
Let them remember.
Let them remember, and it's also, it puts a human touch on things. So remember how we talked about connecting emotionally, and I didn't talk too much about it because that's more appropriate to amiable, the relational type of personality. It's nice to have that human touch. That's why having a little bit of movement when you move around, having some visuals and pictures that are strong is good to keep interest. Having the pictures of your faces, smiling, is also going to be good because it builds out, this isn't just a nebulous idea. You know, I'm giving funding to, or I'm voting for the idea of these people. So I think it's a great idea when you have the team slide to have your pictures on there. I really do. Oh, and I didn't mention it, but it's within the appendix. A lot of people get to the end, right before the conclusion, and they've delivered an idea, but they don't actually ask for any money. How many of you feel awkward asking for money? Get over it. This is the nature of what you're doing, right? That's the whole goal, I believe. Yeah? Getting funding from the judges?
The judges are not giving funding, they're competing for our platform.
Okay, so they're judging,
Yeah,
and their judging and the voting determines who gets the money.
yeah, from us, not from the judges.
Okay, right, for the students. If you don't ask, why? How do you, let's develop a quick ask. How would you stand up right before you get to your conclusion and ask for funding? How? Think about the value proposition that you bring most to the audience, and that audience is the judges, and it seems like all the people are going to be voting as well. So now your audience is much bigger. We don't have any superficial information about them, other than it's like maybe friends of yours or something. We know that they're students. A lot of them will be students. So maybe having this stronger visual background would be good for students, trying to appeal to them. Having a ton of text, black font on white background might be a little bit boring. But that's about all we know so far. They're probably somewhat analytical. This is a tough school to get into. However, if we want to ask, just think about it very humanely. Look deep in the eyes of the judges. Deep in the eyes of the judges. Talk about the value that your product or service brings and why this prize money is so important to you in going forward and bringing this idea to fruition. That's your ask. And if you go through and talk about your milestones and work so hard to prepare all of your financials and analyzing the audience and doing your PowerPoints and practicing in front of the mirror and hopefully a video camera so you can watch yourself, if you go through all that painstaking effort and you get to the end and you don't ask, you kind of like fell apart right at the end. So make sure that you do have an ask in there. Yes?
So should we say directly, we would really appreciate your support like that? Or we'll just say like, oh, this company can really create values for the customer?
I would focus it like that. This company can provide incredible value, and think not just about the customers, but all the stakeholders. How is it going to benefit society? Is it going to create jobs? Is it going to bring some wonderful new technology? Is it going to save people time and money to allow them to enjoy their lives more? Think about all the value propositions that surround your product or service. Remind them of that right at the end. Help us to bring this to something, I mean, not so cheesy like that, but it's a little cheesy, even for me. But think about, make sure that you do an appropriate ask for your group and your personalities that really brings together that value. We need this funding, you know, we really appreciate your support in the voting to help us bring this value to the community, or whatever words you choose.
I have done pitches before. The most difficult part is to close the deal. Ask for funding. Because I'm an embassy person. If everybody in our team, like every pitch asks for the funding, that would put them in an awkward situation, like, oh, who am I going to this funding to?
It's
so
true.
I don't want to do that. There's kind of like psychological barrier there for me to cross over.
Well, that's a very good point, because a lot of people do that. But the very thing that you just said to me, I don't want to ask them because I don't want to make them feel bad that I asked, is exactly what you need to, because other people are going to ask. And if they are that type of person that's swayed by, oh, they asked me and I have to say no, then probably, and that makes them feel bad, then probably the people that don't ask, it'll be easier to say no to. These are drivers. They're probably not going to be too offended or worried about this sort of situation. They've been working in industry for a long time, banking, audit, business owners. So I wouldn't worry too much about making them feel bad. You need to ask. You need to do the ask. You can do it very forcefully and very directly. We need this money. Please vote for us. Or you can do it more subtly. Do it in a way that seems appropriate to you, to your group, and your personalities, but make sure that you do it. Okay, we've got 7 minutes left in our time. Who wants me to look over their presentations now? One group. Well, we've got time for that. Excellent. Pitch Envy is the next one that I wanted you to look at. These are a bunch of different types, kind of like this Wago. It's a translator. Again, the graphics, you can see the words are kept a lot less. They use, much as you would see like in marketing, this kind of cursive. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but they have. So I want to show you lots of different options. Look at this though, nice big picture. No words at all. Well, never mind about that. But nice big strong picture with no bullet points anyway. Oh, and bullet points, we're getting away from bullet points. If you've got a list of things, and you have, for instance, there's not an example. If you have a list of things and you have breakouts of those things, you don't need the whole first, how would it be? The whole first part like if you have 1, 2, 3, and then 3 has 4 items in it or something, if it's only 3 things, you don't need those first bullets. Just the bullet points that are indented are fine. It's just cutting out the extra stuff that's not necessary. If it's important to number things out because they follow an order, then put the numbers in. But if you can find a way to avoid some of the bullets and just get some of the clutter out, then I encourage you to do that. But I like this one especially because very second slide starts off really strong. We set a context, we set an image. If we're talking about need, you know, I'm not even a translation thing. We set a context, we set a picture for the people that we're pitching to right here, right away with a big, strong picture. So that's why I like this one. I want to show this one too. Charts, really nice, really good. If you're going to use charts, make sure that the text is big enough and strong enough that people can read them. I know that within marketing, there is like this desire to put 4 or 5 different charts on one slide to just really have everything all together. Don't do that. Nobody can read that. If you have a lot of information that you need to relate as far as charts, as far as words, font, break it up. I would rather see you break it up in different slides and just spend 15 or 20 seconds on a slide versus the whole minute than to have a minute but then have so much junk on there that people can't even see what it is. Okay, so there's one. And the last one. This will have to download. Are there any other questions while this is loading? And again, if we only have one group that wants me to review their stuff, then that should be fine for time. Any other questions? Yes?
Does Steve Jobs invent the style? The slide chart?
I don't know that he necessarily invented it. I'm sure that other people used it before him. I know that when I was a student, I remember specifically, because I studied more international business and a little bit of politics, and I specifically did a presentation, not that I invented it, I'm not saying that, but I did a presentation where it was dealing with Catalan and some of the conflicts there, and I just had one big screenshot on this huge auditorium screen of a car on fire, and it was amazing. Like, I just thought, oh, it's a really strong visual, I'll just throw it up there. And the audience, because it was so abnormal to see that, everybody in the audience was quiet, wasn't saying anything, totally paying attention to me. It was awesome. Or if you don't want people to pay attention to you, you just put a bunch of stuff up and then they'll, get bored. And so I was kidding about that. I'm sorry, that wasn't very funny. I don't know that he developed it, but he certainly made it popular. Because before that, everybody would put all their content in the slides like I had for you tonight, which is great for students because it's there and it's easy and I can forward it on. Do keep in mind, some of you, when you get into the workplace, you will be sending out your slide decks as well. And sometimes investors want to see a business plan, but they also want to see the slide decks because they're really going to look at the slide decks and just skim over the business plan unless they're super interested, then they'll read it. If you do find yourself in that scenario, having more text on the slide, more than the 6-6 rule, is fine, because much like working with students, you want to have the content there. If you're doing a Steve Jobs style presentation where it's about charisma, that's great, but then if you were to email that slide deck, nobody would get anything out of it, really. So keep in mind also your audience and what they're going to be using it for. I think for this, they don't want the slide decks, right? You're just making the impression. So having the big pictures and the visuals is going to be good. But in the future, when you get into the workplace, especially if you're doing consulting and things like that, having more text within the slide deck is appropriate purely because it can be sent out later and reviewed later, and the content then is there. Yep. Okay. This is kind of like the first one, but it's just a different style of information. But look how boring that is compared to the other two, huh? Okay. I will review this one if anybody, unless we have more questions.
I just have a quick question. If the product or the business has some social value, how important do you think to talk about those things? How much time do you think we should spend on it rather than like maybe just to focus on the business and economics side? Because it's a business.
It's a business. I would, and this is also why it's important to understand your audience. If you know that you've got expressives, a lot of expressives, probably like that third guy, I don't know, Bloom, I don't know why I can't remember his name, then you would spend a lot more time on that because you know that for an expressive to really grasp what you're talking about, they need to see the big picture. I think I'm more of an expressive too, so I like to see the big picture and maybe leading off when you talk about your elevator pitch. You know, in an elevator pitch, you might say, we expect returns of X, or we expect sales of Y by this time. But I think the mission, the social value is going to be a pretty big part of that. So I would bring that in at the beginning, so people understand the framework of your business, and then when you get down to those more specific financials, it'll all make sense and fit together. So I don't have an appropriate amount of time because I don't know how much content you want as far as meeting the analytical needs, but I would put it right up there in the elevator pitch, and maybe you could build it out. That's a good idea, is something to build out in your, in your appendix as far as a timeline or some sort of visual showing all the people who are going to benefit, or flash it up for 10, 15 seconds just to show people. But if you're going to keep it in the presentation, I would do it right pretty much at the beginning. Anything else? Okay, thank you guys so much. If you have any follow-up questions for me, you can email me. I do check my email. It gets pushed to my phone, but if I don't get back to you immediately, like don't send me something 5 minutes before you present. But if you do have follow-up questions that you think of, make sure to shoot me an email. Maybe you all have that or not, and I can post the slides so you can have those as well. And yes, good luck. Thank you for coming tonight. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy your Friday. Well,